GLEX Global Exploration.
Here we go. So again, I'm going to be talking about how Civil War could affect exploration and science, and in this case on Mount Everest. And I've been studying climate change for 20 years or more on the high mountains of the world, and you've all seen how glaciers are disappearing. So in 100 years, I'm going to be using this a lot. I'm a kind of a visual person, so lots of images. You can see how forests have grown up where glaciers used to be under billions of tons of ice. And more close to home for me, this is a mountain that I've studied a lot, Vallona Rahu Norte, and you can see the climbers here and how in 4 short years, the entire summit of the mountain is disappearing. The mountain's getting shorter. And keep in mind these dates, 2012 to 2016, and the difference in that mountain. I'll show you data on this later. I'm not going to give lots and lots of data, but just a few things to kind of give you a sense. And so this is what it looks like on the planet as these glaciers disappear. So we're going to be talking about Mount Everest. Basically, just a quick run through. If you're climbing from the Nepal side, basically the Khumbu Icefall, then this long valley called the Valley of Silence or the Western Khum. Then you climb up through the Lhotse face. Then you can either summit Lhotse, which is the 4th highest peak on Earth, or Mount Everest, which is the highest peak on Earth. Kind of blow that up. You can see the upper part of the Khum, again, lots of crevasses, and then that Lhotse face and the 2 summits. So Mount Everest is what most people tend to think about when they think about Nepal. It's, climbing. This is the highest point on Earth. This is a picture from high up on the North Ridge. But Nepal is an agricultural country, and even in the base of Mount Everest, you have agriculture in the national parks. So some of the highest rice production in the world. The Sherpa are doing a lot of agriculture in the area, and again, the Sherpa are the traditional people who've lived in this area for a long period of time. There's grazing of sheep and yaks in the national parks. But again, predominantly it's driven by tourism, and people do carry 100-pound loads for just a few dollars a day. And the reason they do that is because Nepal is one of the poorest countries on Earth, one of the 10, 20 poorest countries on Earth. The average income is only $1,000 a year. I've worked all over the world, sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, the most remote countries, and this is the only place I've ever seen a water-driven stone wheel still used to grind corn and wheat. This is technology we were using in the 1700s is still being used in these remote mountain areas. So what's my part in this? I've worked in Nepal for probably 15 years at the university, working with government officials, teaching Nepali students, and one day this happened. Whoa, what happened? Let's see if we can get the video to play. All right, we'll see if we can trick it some way. Oh, I need a video here. Does anybody have any ability to play the video? Oh, there he goes. There we go. All right.
Oh, I'm pretty low. I fell through that hole. Thankfully, I didn't keep falling that way. I got trapped here instead. With this ledge, my arm I can't use. I'm gonna have to somehow climb out that way. Oh, I can't go that way at all. Thank God I stopped at this ledge. Oh. Oh. How do I get back up there though? Oh. I'm gonna try and, I fell through that hole. That way, I didn't fall down, thankfully. My right arm is seizing up, I can't use it anymore. I'm gonna try and stem above that, get through that, try and head that way. Hopefully I can escape. Doesn't look easy, that's my hole I fell through. That's my path, I'm gonna try. It doesn't look easy, but that's all I can do. I don't have a right arm. Oh, so I can't get out this way. It's too soft. I can't talk because I have a broken rib, I think. Or my chest is filling with blood or something. So I fell all the way down there. I've crawled out through here. But you say I can't get out that way. So I'm gonna have to crawl through there. Try and climb up, out through this thing. Hopefully I can get out. I'm so close now. Oh, I hurt bad. But I gotta get out. I can't use my right arm. Oh, I'm so close. It's been so fucking easy. I don't work in your right arm. Oh. Climbed all the way. Over, up, over. So close. I just gotta go a little further. I can do it.
So 10 years later, I can still barely watch that video. It was terrible. It was a terrible fall. And I'm going to come back to it, but take a little breath and explain why I was there, how I got there. And it's not an exaggeration to say that I got there because of the civil war that was going on in Nepal. And I'll explain that. So first of all, just in general, Nepal was ruled by a monarchy for most of the modern times. Nepal is predominantly Hindu, and so it's got very close ties to India. And there was a civil war that began, led by a Maoist group, and China supported that civil war very strongly as a way to try and gain power over Nepal. Again, Nepal's between China and India, so it became sort of a proxy war zone. And one of the things that was important for our research is that because the Civil War appealed to the disenfranchised, the poor, the rural, the Buddhist, it had a lot of power in the national parks. And so it kicked the army out of the national parks, it kicked the government out of the national parks, and essentially took control of them, including the parks around Mount Everest. And so I was there on Mount Everest to conduct research. This is kind of looking from Everest Base Camp. So this is all you can see of Mount Everest. Is that little dot, that's the summit of Mount Everest. Again, you've got to go through this Khumbu Icefall to get to the Valley of Silence. So we were there on the at Everest Base Camp. It's way more crowded than this now. And again, the idea was we were going to sample through the Valley of Silence, up this Lhotse face, and then sample to the summit of both Lhotse and Mount Everest. So that's the summit of Everest, that's the summit of Lhotse from the western Khum. And why were we there? Why do we care about what's happening on the mountains on Mount Everest, the glaciers on Mount Everest? And I'm going to leave this picture up for a little while because it's probably the most important slide you're going to see this entire weekend and maybe this year. And the reason is because the world societies depend on mountains for their water. Los Angeles, San Francisco depend on the Sierras. France, Germany depend on the Alps, all of Europe. And the Himalayas provide water for nearly 3 billion people. And as the mountains change, as the glaciers disappear, it changes the hydrology. And so just super fast, and it goes through a very standard process. So for a given year of rainfall, let's just say it's 100 cubic feet per second is what's in a river. So glacier, downstream you have a river that supplies a town. So just pick a random value, so 100 cubic feet per second coming in that river. And then as those glaciers melted back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, they were huge and fat and they were slowly melting. And what happened was, for the same amount of rainfall every year, there was more and more water flowing in the rivers. And currently we're up in here somewhere on most glaciers on the planet. And so instead of 100 cubic feet per second, which is what it used to flow, now it's 120, 130, maybe even up to 150. And so what's happening is societies today are doing irrigated agriculture. They're building more towns. They're building houses, planning on this much water. The problem is, once these glaciers effectively die, as I put it, then the amount of water begins precipitously falling off. And this glacier, 2012, this glacier doesn't exist anymore. And what happens is, because the hydrology changes, infiltration rates, evaporation rates, there's a lot of technical engineering that goes on. Instead of that 100 cubic feet per second that we used to have, now we have maybe 80 cubic feet per second or 70 cubic feet per second. So what you end up with is maybe half of what you had at the peak. Society's planned for this, and they're going to have half that in the future. And the question is, how long is this going to take? Some glaciers, this might take 100 years. Other glaciers, this might take 10 years. And so this is critically important for every society on Earth that depends on a mountain for its water supply. And when you study individual glaciers, what's important is the temperature, obviously, and other meteorological parameters, but what's really important is what's on the glacier. We all know a white t-shirt is cooler in the summer than a black t-shirt. Same thing applies for glaciers. And so what we do is we go out and study, what's on glaciers. So something like this is a strip mine in Peru. And so there's that strip mine. This is the town of Huaraz. And so from there's dust blowing off of that. There's black carbon coming from diesel trucks, from people burning in their homes. And so we go out on the mountains and we collect samples, lead expeditions all around the world. And we collect samples, snow samples, and up to the summits of the mountains. So this is over 20,000 feet, for example, on a steep peak. And we take it and we filter those samples, and we end up with this little disc that has all the dust that was contained in that snow. And we can look at it under a microscope, look at the mineralogy. We collect these from around the world, and we began creating a fingerprint of how the world's mountains are changing. So we can look at things like how at lower elevations there's a lot more dust going on. And so in addition to the temperature being higher at lower elevations, you also have physics driving more melting at these lower elevations. We can look at things like how agricultural burning, when they begin preparing their fields in the summer, affects the glaciers. They're melting the glaciers as they prepare their fields. And we can just measure the raw physics of how much of a temperature change. And you can see almost 10 degrees Celsius on the surface of a glacier. That's monumental change in the amount of melting that can occur. And then we can take it a step further. So this is the strip mine in the town. So these red lines are the mountains around that, and the blue lines are the mountains that are distant. And you can see how over time it's only half the melting that occurs. But remember that picture I showed you, 2012 to 2016? This is what I call the moment when a glacier dies. The mass balance shifts, and there's so much ground exposed, and the glaciers become so thin they can't recover. And so the amount of melting accelerates. And this is when that drop begins on that curve. And so understanding that for China and for India, again, 3 billion people, is critical. But the problem is we have to go through the Khumbu Icefall. This is one of the most dangerous parts of Mount Everest. It's moving 4 feet a day, crushing everything that's in its path. So we hold a puja every year to ask the mountain not to kill us. And on that year, 2014, when I fell in the crevasse, unfortunately, the puja didn't work. And so the route came through here. A chunk of ice about the size of a city block fell off of this, fell onto the climbing route. And this was the scene of the accident. And you can see this cluster of people that developed. And the reason is because this ladder had fallen. And it took about 45 minutes to get it put back together. And so while that occurred, this mass of people developed, and that made the number of deaths much higher. And we were right in the middle of it. One of the guys on my team took this picture. Another one, oops, the wrong thing, was right here. And unfortunately, most of these people, none of them didn't survive. 16 Sherpa died. It was ironic in a terrible way that no Westerners were killed. It was just Sherpa. And we spent the whole day watching the helicopters bring the bodies down. We didn't know who was alive, who was dead. We had spent, just a few hours before, we'd been laughing and joking with people, and we didn't know. And so these guys were all with me. They were all above the thing, except Ashman. He was in the middle. He died, left behind a young wife and a 6-month-old daughter. And this is when the Civil War raises its ugly head. Discovery Channel was there filming a documentary, and they magnanimously said, we're going to give $100,000 to the family of the Sherpa to help support them. We all began raising money to support them as well. The Maoists said, hey, that's great. Give us the money. We'll take care of getting it to the families. And we could watch them stealing it as we were collecting it. It was terrible. And of course, we said no. And they said, all right, well, you can't climb, and we're going to break the leg of any Sherpa who tries to climb. And the Sherpa were livid. They had been supporting the Maoists, and suddenly they were being attacked in their livelihood. They said, we're not giving in. And they began beating people up in the night. And then they said, but the Sherpa still wouldn't give in. And then they said, well, we're going to start attacking Westerners. And a couple people got roughed up in the night, not as bad. And so they said, all right, that's it. The season was over. I had to cancel everything. And so we had terrible memories. Our friends were dead. We'd been punched in the face, told to leave. But we weren't there for glory. We were there for science. So the people I was working with in the Nepali government, the university, got us new permits to climb Mount Himlung near Annapurna to collect our data. The problem is the monsoon was only a week away. There was only 3 of us left who were still climbing. One of the people got sick from exhaustion, from the stress. And so the other climber of the 3 escorted her down, and I was left here. I showed you the filtering. It takes a long time. I was going to just spend a couple days up there collecting as many samples as possible. We walked the perimeter, made sure there was no crevasses. And this was taken just a few minutes before I fell in. A bright, beautiful day, and I go from that to suddenly bouncing off of the walls back and forth in the pitch black. I knew I was dead. As a climber, you feel that your stomach drop out. Oh, God, I'm falling. It's there. And, 1 story, 5 stories, 7 stories, and then I stopped. I'm in agony. I can't use my arm. I totally ripped it out of the socket on the fall down. But I did keep climbing, and you guys saw I was so close to the summit. So close to I guess it is a summit. But there was about a foot of snow between me and the surface, and I literally had to dig myself out of my own grave to get up and get out. Then I spent 19 hours waiting for the helicopter. By the time I got through to people, got things organized, it was dark, and the helicopter couldn't fly in the dark. The whole time I was dying of thirst. I had a Nalgene. I'm spinning it, trying to open it. There's just no way to do that. So I ended up with 15 broken bones, 6 broken vertebrae, internal bleeding. My shoulder was so badly ripped out of socket, it took 4 people like 20 minutes because there was stuff like tissue that had gotten in the socket they had to push out of the way. But I got out because I knew it would destroy my family if I didn't make it back. Seeing my mom's smiling face, that's why you endure that kind of pain to get out. I became famous, was on all the world's news, wrote a book, brought a couple of people who are interested. So you die, you've come back to life. What do you do with that life that you've been given? And a lot of people told me I was blessed, I was alive for a reason. And I think you have a duty to give back to the world. But I was already doing what I'm best at and how I can most contribute. So I still lead mountain expeditions, working with students, trying to train that next generation. And because I know they're the ones who are going to inherit the problems we're creating, but they're also the ones that are going to have to solve those issues. And so training them how to get out into the field and safely, self-arrest in case they fall, to construct anchors and haul people out of crevasses. So how to go out there and conduct the research in a safe way. And so I'm going to finish with Kamal Humagain. This is a Nepali student. I met when he was an undergrad before the fall. After the fall, I brought him to the United States. He worked on a master's and a PhD, and now he's a professor in New York. But we went back to Nepal. We took satellite imagery, mapped the area around the base of Mount Everest, did things like look at how the Maoists were cutting timber in the lowland areas, but forests were growing in the upper areas because of climate change, looked at how different elevations were being differentially affected by climate change, how land cover was shifting from forest to shrub due to human activities. And then we conducted over 250 interviews with the local people, trying to determine how has their resource management changed with tourism, how has climate change affected, how has the Maoist affected them. And the thing that we found stunning was in 1970, if you'd looked at the ethnic makeup of the Khumbu Valley, it would have been almost essentially 100% Sherpa. What we found is it was less than 2/3 Sherpa now. The Sherpa are making their fortune, quote unquote, in the tourism industry, and they leave the valley as fast as they can. Why? They want their children to have access to education. They want their children to have access to hospitals and medical care. They want a better life for their children. And when they leave, people, these are from the Middle Hills and then from the lowlands, are coming from that Hindu part of India from Nepal, with very, very different resource management strategies, very, very different political beliefs. And they're changing the way that the Khumbu is used. And so that's changing resource management. And so we were able to map, so each of these, each little yellow thing's a settlement. We were able to map the changing ethnicity as well as the changing environment, the different land cover changes, and create this land change model so that the government, the local leaders, and the individual people can better understand how to manage as we move from forested areas, how to not go to rock or not go to agriculture due to anthropogenic or climate change issues. So how to better manage these areas. So I'm past time. I want to finish the point of this conference is what's next. So again, we've worked in the Central Andes, we've worked in Nepal, and so this Christmas, New Year's, we're going to Annapurna, I wish, Aconcagua, which is the highest point in South America, in the Southern Andes, so extending down into Chile and Argentina, seeing how their water issues are changing. So if you're interested, you're welcome to join us. So thank you for your attention. ClimberScience.com for more information.